The Order of the Sith Lords, or just the Sith, are the central antagonists of the Star Wars franchise, symbolizing a twisted reflection of the Jedi Order and the ever-corrupting effects of selfishness. Drawing their powers from the dark side of the Force, these villains have had a hand in virtually every major Star Wars storyline since their introduction to audiences in 1977, with their in-universe influence spanning roughly 7,000 years at the absolute minimum. Although every era of Sith history has its legendary figures, certain time frames have definitely left more of a mark than others, be it through deed, cultural influence, or innovation. In today's video, we will be ranking the Sith from the Knights of the Old Republic era from weakest to strongest in order to determine which Dark Lords reign above the rest. However, before we go over the list, I need to establish disclaimers, as there are many. Firstly, as I said a second ago, this video will be based exclusively on the mainline Sith characters depicted in the Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic video game series and their supporting materials. While it is true that Sith such as Emperor Vitiate and Lord Scourge were alive during the game's events, neither were active in the main storyline until much later, disqualifying them from this list. That said, I will be including the full scope of the Jedi Civil War, meaning that the Sith featured here will be taken between the years 3959 BBY to 3951 BBY. My reasoning behind these cutoff dates stem mainly from the fact that since Darth Revan is no longer a Sith Lord in the canon story of KOTOR 1 and onward, I would have to disqualify him as well if I were to limit my analysis strictly to the games. Plus, come on, you think I'm going to do a KOTOR Sith video and not cover Darth Revan? What kind of peasant do you take me for? Secondly, on the subject of canonicity, while KOTOR 1 and 2 are games with several different campaigns and dialogue options determined by player choice, I will be deferring mainly to the light side storylines for this video, as they are the canon depictions of the characters featured, and the ones that are supported by the vast majority of supplemental materials. The only exceptions I will make with this rule is with any piece of Darkside campaign lore that is directly canonized by creators or supporting sources. General statements made by creators will also be considered if they are reputable and do not drastically contradict the narratives presented in their stories. In regards to the cut content for the games, while I may make some references for clarification, they don't change very much from a power scaling perspective. Thirdly, I would like to take a moment to clarify what kind of definition of the term Sith we are dealing with for this ranking video. Sith are not just people who serve an evil theocratic regime, nor are they strictly dark force wielders who use red lightsabers. Sith, particularly in this era, refers to very specific individuals who have reached a particular phase of power development and recognition within the Order in accordance with their religious dogma. As Darth Traya herself points out, at the end of the day, the Sith are a belief, not a blanket definition. With that in mind, this list will not take into account the Sith Assassins, Dark Jedi, or Sith Troopers who served in the Sith's various empires, as they do not meet the criteria for being true Sith during the KOTOR era. The same goes for fallen Jedi like Atris. Lastly, while some of these Sith did not stay Sith for their entire lives, and can be said to have not reached their peaks until after they renounced the dark side, or never did so period, I will be examining them based on how strong they were as Sith, rather than what they eventually became or could have been. However, I will reference where their peaks could rank when and where I deem appropriate. With all that out of the way, let's get started. Starting in D tier, we have the Sith Apprentices and the Sith Acolytes. These two represent the lowest levels of the Sith Order while still adhering to the doctrine of their religion. As noted by multiple sources, The KOTOR Sith Empire followed a strict hierarchy system through which adepts could advance if they proved themselves worthy. This actually makes the first few tiers of this list fairly straightforward when it comes to power scaling. Apprentices and acolytes were both ranks referring to a trainee of a Sith master, and were equal to each other in terms of their authority. Their levels of strength were also very much on a case-by-case basis, which is another reason I place them on the same overall tier. Although apprentices would obviously start off weaker than the acolytes upon initial admittance, the more talented amongst them did have the potential to advance into full Dark Lord status. By contrast, acolytes tended to plateau where they were at, though some were granted special designations. This is corroborated by Lord Cordis during Bane's time, who explicitly referred to the acolytes of Khan's empire, which followed a similar structure to KOTOR's, as being their order's equivalent of the Jedi Knights, with Dark Lords being the rank above that which relatively few apprentices ever achieved. In terms of combative portrayal, the Sith apprentices and the Sith acolytes were literally the median-level grunts a player had to get through before fighting the bosses of the stage, usually being converted or slaughtered en masse by Revan and his allies with low to mid difficulty at best. Notable figures from these classes include the apprentice Mikkel, as well as the unnamed acolytes who guarded the Temple of the Ancients on the planet Leon. Despite not meeting his expectations, Sith Master Jorak Ulin acknowledged that Mikkel possessed the disposition of a true Sith. In a surprising turn of events, the apprentice, with the aid of Revan, even managed to kill the old master within the tomb of Tulak Hord. This suggests that Mikkel was not only above your rank-and-file apprentice, but he may very well have ascended to full-fledged Sith Master had he chosen to remain a part of the Order. On a similar note, the Acolytes of Leon, that's a good band name, were stated to have been hand-selected and somewhat trained by Darth Malak himself, suggesting that they were marginally stronger than many of their peers, though still not strong enough to be elevated beyond their rank. In C tier, we have Jorak Ulin, Yuthura Ban, and Uthar Wyan. Just as I had a representation of the average Jedi Council Master in my previous ranking video, these three are what I would cite as examples of your average Sith Master, with their strength being the most consistent level one could witness from the rank across the KOTOR era. Sith Masters were the senior forces of the Order, ranking just beneath Shadowhands and the ruling Dark Lord as per the aforementioned hierarchy system, automatically scaling them above D tier. Jorak Ulin is at the bottom of this tier due to him being overthrown by Uthar in the Jedi Civil War, and it being heavily implied that he is past his prime during the first game. Jorak never made any attempt to take direct revenge on Uthar over the course of his self-imposed exile, nor did he make any strikes against Yuthura and the other masters. That said, he was successful in leading the Sith apprentices he deemed unworthy to their deaths, which is still impressive even if he did have the home field advantage. The Hermit ultimately met his end at the hands of Mikkel and Revan's party, and while the apprentice was quick to label Jorak a fraud, the fact that Mikkel needed such help to beat Jorak does lead me to believe that he was still stronger than the Sith apprentices or acolytes on a one-to-one basis, even if only by a small margin. However, unlike the other two masters ranked in this tier, I can envision a scenario where Jorak is overwhelmed by multiple D-tier Sith working together against him so long as the battle occurs in a neutral setting. Yuthura Ban was a renowned instructor at the Sith Academy on Korriban, while Uthar Wyan was the school's headmaster. Despite being master and student, the two constantly conspired against each other, each making several attempts to mold Revan into their weapon to destroy the other. This ultimately leads into a sequence wherein the player is given the option to poison either Yuthura or Uthar before a confrontation within the tomb of Naga Sadow, which results in one of the Sith Masters being weakened and then killed. Given that Uthar is the one Revan chooses to poison in the canon storyline, I think you can interpret his in-universe motivation as him considering Uthar more dangerous than Euthura. It also makes sense given his rank. Suppose that Uthar was not the strongest Sith Master at the Academy. In that case, there is literally no reason for him to be the headmaster, especially considering that we know for a fact that he got his position by overthrowing Jorak. This is further backed up by Uthar just flat out having better in-game stats than Euthura, and although this could just be me looking a little too deeply, in terms of portrayal, Euthura seemed to be more afraid of Uthar than Uthar was of her. That could just be personality, but it does make sense given the story. Furthermore, Uthar getting poisoned in canon also means that we've never technically seen the headmaster fight at his full strength, and it still took the combined efforts of Euthura and Revan to defeat him. Quite impressive if I do say so myself. Next in B tier, we have the Sith Shadowhands Visas Mar, Darth Bandon, and Bastila Shan. As specified by several sources, Shadowhands were the second-in-command and foremost apprentices of the reigning Dark Lord of the Sith. Not only did they outrank every other Sith in the Empire save their masters, but their title was bestowed upon them specifically due to their immense strength, meaning that being above C tier is quite literally a job requirement. Visas Mar was the apprentice of Darth Nihilus, with their bond being the last vestiges of human connection the Lord of Hunger ever experienced. Although her strength as a Sith is by far the least hyped out of the Shadowhands, that did not mean she had nothing impressive going for her. As with all Miraluka, Visas possessed an innate connection to the universal energy field since birth. And though not directly stated, her potential is implied narratively to be extraordinary even by the standards of her people. When Nihilus attacked the Miraluka's homeworld of KOTOR, Visas was the only sentient to survive the devastation. Like I said, whether or not her power had any bearing on her survival is unclear. However, it would help to justify Nihilus's decision to take her on as his apprentice. Regarding feats, Visas doesn't have much to draw on until becoming a good guy, though there are 3 worth discussing. She is confirmed to have fought and defeated a fully armed HK series assassin droid at some unknown point, and would later incapacitate the entire crew of the Ebon Hawk with the exception of Mitra Surik early on in the second game. While impressive, we mustn't forget that this feat was done through unknown means with extensive prep time against relatively underdeveloped versions of the Exiles party. This is made all the more apparent when Visas proceeds to engage Mitra in a duel and is utterly defeated. While the game guide does imply that the Shadowhand entered the battle mentally nerfed, she still admits total inferiority to Mitra. And like I said, this was well before the Jedi reached her peak. Before we continue, one last thing about Visas Mar worth mentioning is that after she renounces the dark side and comes to term with her grief over KOTOR's destruction, she actually becomes much stronger. So much so that her, Mitra, and Canderous Ordo were able to triple team her master and win, which is beyond impressive given the Lord of Hunger scaling, which we'll cover later. Darth Bandon was the apprentice of Darth Malak, who, despite having less screen time than Visas Mar, completely outstrips the Sith version of her in terms of lore and portrayal. Bandon has various statements of being a powerful warrior, with his capabilities being noted to surpass all other Sith in Malak's empire aside from Malak himself, hence his elevation to Shadowhand status. It has even been confirmed that Bandon intended to overthrow his master once he believed he was ready, which, while par for the course for Sith apprentices, still says a lot about his confidence in his strength. In terms of accomplishments, Darth Bandon is stated by his entry in the game guide to have slain many Jedi over the course of his career, with him having never been defeated prior to his encounter with Revan. His bio in the Knights of the Old Republic campaign guide adds further context to these feats by stating that he had impaled a score of Jedi in his service to his master. Now, the term score can have several meanings, but numerically speaking, it often refers to 20, meaning that Darth Bandon has at least 20 Jedi kills under his belt. That's pretty fucking impressive. In fact, if we're being honest, it's probably more than a lot of full Dark Lords ever achieve in their lifetimes. During the events of KOTOR 1, Bandon would battle Revan and his allies on the planet Manan and was ultimately defeated despite having the assistance of 2 Dark Jedi. Though a loss, Bandon's clash with Revan still speaks decently well of his strength. We know for a fact that Revan got progressively stronger over the course of the game, and since Revan's threshold for power is confirmed to scale above Mitra Surik's, I do consider his performance more impressive than Visa's. This is further corroborated by Bandon's character sheet stating that the version of Revan he fought had grown much more powerful since the beginning of the game, possibly already rivaling his Sith self, which makes his loss more understandable. Bastila Shan is at the top of this tier, having been captured and tortured by Malak into fully embracing the dark side, ultimately supplanting Darth Bandon as his shadow hand. Bastila has a lot of impressive accolades for her era, being referred to as a quintessential Jedi who made her mark on galactic history by being one of the youngest adepts ever to master the art of battle meditation. One of the most well-known EU force powers, battle meditation was a pinnacle telepathic technique that enabled practitioners to enhance the morale, stamina, and overall combat prowess of allies while simultaneously reducing the combat effectiveness of enemies by eroding their will to fight. Years into the Jedi Civil War, Bastila Shan led a Jedi strike team that was tasked with apprehending Darth Revan, the group eventually fighting their way onto the Dark Lord's flagship and confronting him until Malak's betrayal brought the battle to a premature end. Now, even with the stretched resources of the Jedi Order taken into account, the fact that the Council believed that Bastila, who, mind you, was still a Padawan at the time, stood even the slightest chance of capturing Revan is not something to brush aside. While we never see the full scope of their clash in-game, the Essential Guide to the Force does depict a sequence of Bastila successfully hitting Darth Revan with a Force Blast. This attack obviously did not KO Revan, but much like Anakin briefly pressing Dooku on Geonosis, this is still an impressive showing given the standing of the two characters. Bastila would later duel Darth Malak aboard the Leviathan, and though defeated, she was able to land a saber throw attack and hold him off long enough for her allies to escape. After succumbing to Malak's torture, Shan would embrace the Sith teachings and be reborn as a Shadow Hand. Not only is she confirmed to have gotten much more powerful, but she even proved to be more of an asset to Malak's empire than Darth Bandon. This is made all the more apparent when she clashes with and even manages to escape from a stronger Jedi Revan than the one who killed Bandon. All that said, even Bastila's newfound dark power, plus an additional amp from the Starforge, would still prove insufficient to kill Revan at the game's climax. Fortunately, their love gave her the strength to return to the light side of the Force and develop into a Jedi Master of legendary status. Before we continue, this is the spot on the tier where I would rank Visas Mar if you were to factor in her Jedi self, which is confirmed to be much stronger than her days as a Shadow Hand. Light side Visas had a much clearer headspace than her Sith incarnation, and put in work in the final battle against Darth Nihilus, which is why I can definitely see her being stronger than Darth Bandon and roughly equal with Shadow Hand Bastila Shan. In A tier, we have the Sith Triumvirate, which was a group comprised of Darth Sion, Darth Traya, and Darth Nihilus, the main antagonists of Knights of the Old Republic 2, the Sith Lords. All three of these villains share multiple statements of being the strongest Darksiders to remain in the wake of Malic's death, with Bastila stating that she couldn't have beaten them alone during their reign, which should scale them well above the Sith featured in the previous tiers. Regarding their standing compared to each other, the Triumvirate is surprisingly one of the easiest teams of Sith to parse out. Darth Sion is at the bottom of this tier due to him getting bullied by the rejuvenated Darth Traya, who herself admitted that Darth Nihilus's powers were far beyond her own. This line of scaling is also supported by the cut content, which depicts Nihilus easily overpowering Sion when he attempted to attack him aboard his flagship. Despite those two humiliations, Darth Sion was still an absolute beast compared to the wider KOTOR era. He is referred to as one of the most rage-filled Sith ever by the Insider magazine, a source which also states that his skills as a lightsaber assassin were feared by both Jedi and Sith alike. His main shtick revolved around his otherworldly durability. Sion's body was literally held together by sheer hatred, channeling the dark side of the Force to hold his broken and decaying flesh together whenever he sustained lethal damage like some sort of zombie. While this ability did make him somewhat unkillable, using it caused Sion to feel excruciating pain at all times as the injuries he suffered never fully healed, hence his title as the Lord of Pain. He even eventually learned to feed off his perpetual agony to enhance his connection to the dark side, strongly implying that he mastered a twisted variant of the Crucitorn power. Now, the exact limits of Darth Sion's survivability are not well defined. Though occasionally referred to as a quote-unquote immortal, this was clearly just a figurative statement used to enhance his mystique. His ability to repair the loss of limbs and disintegration was clearly limited, and it has also been shown that he can die if one is able to convince him to let go of his pain, as was the case with Meetra Surik. In regards to combative showings, Darth Sion is confirmed by his character sheet to have slain many Jedi in his wars against the Order, with his most notable kill being that of Luna Vash, a member of the High Council whom he captured and tortured to death on Korriban. While we don't see this fight play out on screen, Luna does make note of Sion's perverse connection to the dark side of the Force in her journal, and even throws some praise towards his cunning despite his brutish nature, further solidifying the Lord of Pain's place as a council-level threat. The assassin would later battle Meetra Surik during the final act of the game within the bowels of Malachor V. Though defeated, Sion still gave the exile a good fight, with his existence being undone through more psychological means than physical ones, which is rather impressive considering that Meetra at this point had aided in the defeat of Darth Nihilus, and had grown so strong that she exceeded Jedi Revan's expectations, a bar not easily overcome. Darth Traya was the Lord of Betrayal, the former master of Revan, Sion, and Nihilus, and the evil puppet master behind all the events of KOTOR 2. A Jedi historian turned Sith Lord, Krea's strength would fluctuate quite a bit throughout the KOTOR timeframe, being the foremost member of the Sith Triumvirate before having her powers stripped from her by Sion and Nihilus. After some time spent training and influencing the exile, Krea would rekindle her connection to the dark side and take up the title of Darth Traya once more, becoming even stronger than she had been previously. In this new state of being, Traya was able to bully Darth Sion back into submission, with her encyclopedia entry confirming that she was more powerful than end-of-game Meetra Surik during their final confrontation. That may sound strange since Mitra beat Traya, however, there is precedence in lore for superior lightsaber or tactical abilities bridging a gap in force power, and even then, the gap between them was obviously not massive given how the exile helped to defeat Nihilus, whom Traya admitted was more powerful than herself. Not only that, but we mustn't forget that Darth Traya's fight with Mitra took place at the heart of Trayus, which was suspended above a literal geyser of dark side energy, which had likely provided her with a power amp. Moving into her actual capabilities, Krea's vast knowledge of Jedi and Sith lore granted her an extremely robust skill set. She is one of only 2 Sith Lords on this list confirmed to possess technical knowledge of all 7 forms of classical lightsaber combat, and is a noted master of numerous advanced force powers such as Tutaminis, Shatterpoint, and Force Drain. Her most dangerous weapon by far was her cunning, constantly analyzing the psychological states of those around her to the most minute detail, and manipulating them into either serving her or walking blindly into an unwinnable situation. While she was quick to anger and didn't take resistance well, she has proven time and again that she can punch way above her weight class by playing the galaxy like a Dejarik board. In addition to the feats already covered, I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge Darth Traya's displays at the Jedi Enclave, wherein she insta-killed Masters Rook Lamar, Kavar, and Zez-Kai-El with Force Drain after ragdolling them with telekinesis. For reference, all 3 of these guys were long-standing members of the Jedi Council whom Kreia herself cites as powerful threats in the Darkside campaign, an accolade supported by canon material. While I do think certain fans occasionally oversell this feat due to the fact that Traya had been expressly using her telepathic abilities to weaken the Jedi preemptively, and took time to gather her power beforehand, it is indisputable that Vrook, Kavar, and Zez all had their lightsabers drawn and were ready to fight, yet still folded under the Lord of Betrayal's powers, which really speaks to her ability to manipulate battlefields to her advantage. Darth Nihilus is at the top of this tier, and I think you can all guess why by now. He is stated numerous times to be the strongest Sith of the Triumvirate, with even the new and improved Traya stating that his powers were far beyond her own. This ranking is supported by the simple fact that Mitra Surik was able to defeat both Sion and Traya in 1v1 fights, yet needed the aid of her party members to kill Nihilus. Strength in numbers and all that. In terms of ethereal makeup, Darth Nihilus's place in the Force was an anomaly, having delved so deeply into the primordial dark side that he eventually sacrificed his humanity and was transformed into a wound in the Force itself, slowly displacing his personality into his robes and armor. As his physical form withered away, he essentially devolved into a creature of pure intention. Like a bottomless hole, he existed solely to sate his never-ending hunger, thus his title as the Lord of Hunger. Some have taken this unique existence to mean that Nihilus could only be killed by another wound such as Mitra. However, not only is that never stated, but the lore frames it as more of a fire and water situation, i.e. they are the most effective counters to each other rather than the singular possibilities. I mean, if Force Wounds were just whacked out invincible against everything except other Force Wounds, that would be pretty silly. Regarding Force combat, Darth Nihilus is noted by numerous sources to have studied many of the greatest and most dangerous of Sith teachings. While his telekinesis could move starships, his stunning could stop Jedi Masters cold, and his telepathy could turn other adepts into puppets, the Lord of Hunger was primarily known for his mastery of Force Drain. Also referred to as Drain Life, Force Drain was an extremely advanced dark side technique that involved the user tapping into the connections within the Force between all living things, and then siphoning that energy from a desired target to empower themselves. This principle could manifest anywhere from a subtle weakening of a foe's force reservoir to straight up draining them dry until they were quite literally reduced to dust. In terms of potency, Darth Traya states that Nihilus was nearing the height of Force Drain's power in both versions of the KOTOR 2 campaign, with the Lord of Hunger using it to consume the energies of entire planets as he did with Visas Mar's homeworld of KOTOR. While planetary-level drain is not unprecedented in other Sith Lords, nor is it some unblockable Avada Kedavra-esque power many have claimed it to be, I won't deny that Nihilus's prowess does grant him the potential to sap the life of anyone on this list under the right circumstances. During the climax of KOTOR 2, Darth Nihilus would face the combined forces of the Jedi Mitra Surik and Visas Mar, and the Mandalorian Canderous Ordo aboard his flagship and was defeated after an intense battle. While there are some ambiguities surrounding the canon rendition of this confrontation, the most consistent rendition is of Nihilus opening with a stun that stops the party cold, and then attempting to devour Surik's energies, which he is shocked to learn he cannot do since she is his polar opposite in the Force. This single misfire of his power weakened the Lord of Hunger so severely that he was unable to defend himself against the exile and her friends, resulting in his death, the Sith's body erupting in an aura of dark side energy. Now, as I think that description made clear, Darth Nihilus's defeat aboard the Ravager had much less to do with him being directly bested in strength, and more to do with Mitra having the perfect counter to his hacks. That said, the fact that a single misfire of Force Drain starved Nihilus to the point where he is stated to have been no match for Mitra and Visas really highlights the precarious nature of his abilities, which segues nicely into our final point of scaling. Despite his unique place in the Force, several sources have confirmed that Darth Nihilus is not the strongest KOTOR-era Sith, which is why he isn't ranked any higher. All throughout the game, Kreia repeatedly states that the ancient Sith Lords were much stronger than the Sith Triumvirate, even referring to Nihilus's power level as only rivaling some of the ancient masters in the Dantooine section of the Darkside campaign. This statement has been canonized by the game's director and writer Chris Avellone, who also cited Naga Sadow as an ancient Sith whom end-of-game Nihilus was weaker than. In terms of scaling, Naga Sadow is stated by the fact file to have been surpassed by the infamous Sith King Freedon Nad. Freedon Nad would have his essence completely obliterated by an alive pre-prime Exar Kun, with that version of Exar having lore which places his strength beneath the likes of Darth Revan and Darth Malak. This scaling chain is supported by Mitra, who flatly states in the Revan novel that pre-KOTOR Revan's command of the Force was greater than anyone she had ever met, despite having already fought and defeated the Sith Triumvirate. All that being said, it should be noted that Traya imagined that Nihilus could potentially grow strong enough to threaten all life in the galaxy, with Chris Avellone also stating that a fight between Nihilus and Sadow would hinge on more than just their power levels. Darth Nihilus is the walking definition of a hacks-based fighter that we've never actually seen at the peak of his potential, though I'll go over where I believe that hypothetical version of him could rank later on. In S tier, we have the Sith Lords Darth Revan and Darth Malak, who are the primary protagonist and antagonist of Knights of the Old Republic 1. Again, please keep in mind that I am only examining Revan's strength as it was during his reign as the Dark Lord of the Sith, rather than his future Jedi self, or his non-canon Sith form seen in the Darkside campaign. On a similar note, Malak's analysis will be centered on his end-of-game base form rather than when he was amped by the energies of the Starforged superweapon. Even with those elements considered, Darth Revan and Darth Malak were still, by far, the most legendary Darksiders to come out of the KOTOR timeframe. Both share multiple statements of being amongst the strongest Sith of not just their era, but all eras of galactic history. This alone is enough to scale them above the Sith featured previously, as none of them possess any supreme-grade accolades, but that's just the tip of the iceberg. Despite being a bit inconsistent, particularly in his later years, Darth Revan's might cannot be understated. Even as a young Jedi, Revan's skills were noted to be extraordinary, helped in no small measure by his intense hunger for knowledge and the myriad of teachers he studied under. There is no question that he was the Jedi's greatest champion of his day. While he was unable to keep his mind from being dominated by Emperor Vitiate in their first encounter, he was powerful enough to resist the full effects of the Dark Lord's hypnosis, with his subsequent transformation into Darth Revan making him far stronger than he had been during the Mandalorian Wars. In terms of overall scaling, Kreia did not just describe Darth Revan as being powerful, she described him as being power, his aura the equivalent of staring into the heart of the Force itself. Hyperbole? Probably. Still badass? Absolutely. In terms of more direct scaling, Bastula's narration in the Knights of the Old Republic remake trailer refers to Revan as having been the greatest Sith in generations. This is significant since Exar Kun had been defeated just 2 years prior to Revan's birth in Tales of the Jedi. Assuming that the upcoming game will take place within the Legends continuity, this would place Darth Revan above an alive Exar Kun, who is confirmed to have been stronger than Friedan Nad, who is confirmed to have been stronger than Naga Sadow, who is confirmed to have been stronger than Darth Nihilus. By the way, the reason I keep using the term alive Exar Kun is because that is the version of the character the KOTOR Sith are scaled to, and it's also not representative of the character's peak. Peak Exar Kun is the amped Sith spirit version of him seen in the Jedi Academy trilogy and the novel I, Jedi. That guy is on a completely different level to any KOTOR Sith. In fact, he might unironically rival Darth Sidious, but that's a video for another day. Getting back on topic, even if the KOTOR remake does not end up following Legends, Mitra still cites pre-game Revan as possessing a greater level of power than anyone she had ever met, which at that point includes the entire Sith triumvirate. Regarding his combative Force abilities, Revan was consistently referred to as being more skilled than pre-game Darth Malak, which further cements his claim as the ultimate Sith of his empire. Although little of his moveset was ever showcased during the Jedi Civil War, his character sheet does credit him with several advanced techniques such as Battle Mind, Force Lightning, and Force Whirlwind, as well as the aforementioned Force Drain. His telekinetic prowess has been alleged by KOTOR's head writer Drew Karpyshyn to be sufficient to crush buildings, and although I can't find the original source for this quote, such a feat should honestly be the least of what Darth Revan is capable of, given how he scales above Darth Nihilus. Shifting into feats, Revan would defeat Mandalore the Ultimate in single combat at the climax of the Mandalorian Wars. Though not a Force wielder, Ultimate was noted to have put up a valiant struggle against his Jedi foe before being killed, which is impressive considering that he had demonstrated the skill to one-shot a young Malak when the war originally began. Following his corruption to the dark side of the Force and subsequent transformation into a Sith, Darth Revan would slay many Jedi in his crusades against the Galactic Republic. At some point during the Jedi Civil War, Darth Malak would challenge Darth Revan for the title of Dark Lord, but was ultimately defeated, losing his jaw in the process. Despite this rather gruesome loss, Malak is confirmed by Insider Issue 88 to have given Revan a desperate fight before being subdued, signifying that it had not been an easy victory for his master. This is corroborated by Drew Karpyshyn, who has gone on record stating that Malak had actually been a better lightsaber duelist than Revan, though Revan still beat him in every other category such as experience, tactical skill, and raw force power, hence his victory. Darth Revan's final combat feat was his confrontation with Bastila Shan and her Jedi squad aboard his flagship. I've already gone over this battle in detail, so there's really no reason to do so again. I'll only reiterate that Revan might have gotten struck with a force blast conjured by Bastila, and Malak's betrayal ended things prematurely, so there's not much to analyze. Darth Malak would assume the title of Dark Lord of the Sith after firing on Revan's flagship, waging an even bloodier war in his master's stead. Though initially weaker than Darth Revan, Darth Malak would grow much stronger in the years he spent reigning as Sith Master, with the Jedi Council Master Vandar Tokara stating that Malak's command over the dark side had surpassed Revan's by the time of the first game. This makes sense considering that he was already strong enough to give Darth Revan a desperate fight, as well as his ability to clash with the redeemed Jedi Revan, who was much more powerful than he had ever been as a Sith. Despite his noted preference for physical combat, Darth Malak's force abilities were phenomenal, his displays of power and skill being easily some of the best of the KOTOR era. Like Revan, Malak is confirmed to have mastered numerous advanced powers such as Battle Mind, Force Lightning, Force Whirlwind, and the lethal Force Drain. His stunning was sufficient to ensnare multiple targets simultaneously, and given his scaling, I don't think it's a stretch to assume that he could replicate Nihilus's TK showings. He is also confirmed to have extensively researched and experimented with the Force-based technology of the Starforge, developing a number of insights unique to him, which we'll cover later. During the Mandalorian and Jedi Civil Wars, Malak's combat feats became the stuff of legends, slaying both Neo-Crusaders and Jedi alike in single combat. Although Darth Malak did lose his battle with Darth Revan, as I've said before, he is confirmed to have given his master a desperate fight, which speaks to a high level of difficulty. This feat is even more impressive considering that it took place years before he reached his peak. Jumping to the actual game, Malak would battle Bastila Shan aboard the Leviathan and would completely outclass her at every turn, the Jedi apprentice only being shown landing a single hit in the entire exchange. Bear in mind that this version of Bastila was likely stronger than the one who had confronted Darth Revan. At the climax of KOTOR 1, Darth Malak would battle Revan once more in a titanic rematch aboard the Starforge and was once again defeated, the Sith Lord succumbing to his injuries and finally passing into the Force. Now, much like the Darth Nihilus boss fight, this feat has several ambiguities surrounding its canon rendition. However, the most consistent interpretation is that base form Malak clashed with Jedi Revan, but broke off when it became evident that he couldn't win, which was when he decided to tap into the energies of the Starforge and take on his empowered state. Although this amp enabled Darth Malak to perform much better, with the fight being referred to by the SWTOR Encyclopedia as a fierce duel, Revan was still the one to come out on top, and the Jedi Civil War was finally brought to an end. Now, despite the numerous variables that were at play, this feat solidifies Darth Malak's place at the top of S tier. As I've said many times throughout this video, end-of-game Jedi Revan was far more powerful than his Sith self had ever been, with Darth Revan having several sources confirming him to be above the Sith triumvirate. Base form Malak may not have been Revan's equal, but he was certainly an obstacle for him given that he lasted long enough to break away and power up, which, quite frankly, he would not have been able to do had he been at the same level of strength he had been at when he lost his jaw. Add this to his numerous accolades, and it really goes without saying that when it comes to the Knights of the Old Republic era, Darth Malak is the ultimate Sith. Last but certainly not least, we have the Beyond KOTOR S-Tier Plus. In this category, we have Starforge-empowered Darth Malak and a hypothetical full potential Darth Nihilus. This section represents the Sith who, under the right conditions, could surpass the power ceiling of the Knights of the Old Republic timeframe. To put it more plainly, these are the KOTOR-born Sith who would be the most effective in a fight with someone from the distant past or future. Starforge Malak's scaling is fairly straightforward due to the mechanics and range of his power-up being so heavily flushed out in the lore. As I mentioned in his previous analysis, Malak spent considerable time experimenting with the Starforge's Force-centric technology, developing several unique insights along the way. His most notable achievement was when he infused the corrupting powers of the Forge into the corpses of 8 Jedi he had taken from Dantooine, essentially turning them into batteries of Force energy that he could then siphon with his Force drain to amp himself. As Yoda would probably say, 8 Jedi does not a small power-up make. Starforge Darth Malak is referred to as nearly unstoppable by his databank entry, with both it and the game confirming that the form allowed him to replenish any life force he had lost, making it both a buff and a recovery tactic. Getting a bit more specific, the Wizards of the Coast magazine states that Starforge Malak's powers were far greater than both Exar Kun and Freedon Nad. Considering that base Malak should already scale above Exar and Freedon, who themselves are confirmed to be above end-of-game Nihilus via the scaling chain established earlier, this would mean that Starforge Malak would not only solo the entire Sith triumvirate, but he might do so relatively easily. I'm talking what Sidious did to Mace's squad in ROTS kind of easy. Yeah. Regarding showings, Starforge Malak's one and only combative feat was his final battle with Jedi Revan, which, while resulting in a loss, is still confirmed to have been a fierce confrontation. An impressive accomplishment given Revan's tremendous improvements since his Sith days. That said, there is one more way to power scale Starforge Malak, which, while very questionable in its canonicity, actually has the potential to place him above Jedi Revan. Although the KOTOR video game and the vast majority of its tie-in material depict Revan defeating Malak in a 1v1, the Galactic Timeline archives compiled by Jedi Master Nostaral showcases Bastila aiding Revan, implying that it took their combined strength to finally take the Sith Lord down. Now, allow me to be blunt. This is not canon. There is no version of the game's campaign where Bastila aids Revan in the Malak boss fight, and SWTOR writer Robert Chesney has even gone on record saying that the events and portrayals in the timeline archives are meant to be viewed as Nostaral's interpretations of history and therefore may not be entirely accurate. Not only is there precedence for this sort of thing in real life, but also with other events in the KOTOR series, such as Visas' involvement in Nihilus's death. That being said, if you do take Bastila helping Revan as canon for whatever reason, you can use it to justify Starforge Malak as not only being equal to KOTOR Jedi Revan, but potentially even stronger. This version of Darth Malak could very well be above Revan from the Revan novel, who one-shotted Darth Nihilus and could also land hits on an early Emperor Vitiate. Yeah. Like I said, not canon, not his actual power level, but still some interesting food for thought. Next up, we have the hypothetical version of Darth Nihilus who has reached his full potential. While the exact limits of Nihilus's capabilities are much less explored than Starforge Malak's, the danger he represented to the wider galaxy has always been abundantly clear. As I said earlier, Darth Nihilus is the walking definition of a hacks-based fighter. Despite his relatively low power level compared to other Sith, he can punch way above his weight class due to the unique nature of his skill set, as it essentially boils down to whether or not an opponent can handle his specific application of Force Drain. Drain is not some unblockable insta-kill move, but it is extremely difficult to dispel. And due to Nihilus gaining power at least somewhat proportional to what he devours, it does give him the potential to shrink the gap between himself and a stronger adversary. That said, his greatest strength is also his greatest weakness. He is so enslaved to his hunger that a single misuse of Drain can have deadly repercussions, and there is no reason to assume that this weakness wouldn't apply to the Lord of Hunger's peak. Quite the opposite, in fact. As to where full potential Nihilus's strength caps out, Traya did state that he was getting close to reaching the tier of the Ancient Sith, so I think it's pretty safe to say that he would have surpassed Naga Sadow, with her also speculating that he could have threatened all life in the galaxy if left unchecked. These statements are why I rank peak Darth Nihilus ever so slightly above Starforge Malak. Although the Starforge is confirmed to be a galaxy-wide threat, Malak requires external hardware to achieve that tier, whereas peak Nihilus could, in theory, reach it under his own power. This threat level is further backed up by Mace Windu, who stated during the Clone Wars that if Anakin Skywalker could not learn to resist the planetary drain abilities of the Force Harvester, the entire Republic may have been doomed. Speaking of the Harvester, not only does Anakin succeed in his endeavor to resist it, but it has also been confirmed that Count Dooku learned drain resistance in order to extract the superweapon in the first place. Add this onto their scaling, and Anakin and Dooku crush Nihilus like a piece of paper. That may sound dramatic, but again, it goes back to the unevenness of Darth Nihilus's moveset. When it comes to destructive capability, a hypothetical full potential Darth Nihilus is, without a doubt, the strongest potential version of a pure Sith character who lived during the time frame of the Knights of the Old Republic series. However, he is also specialized to a fault and is not exempt from being defeated by other figures in his era or other eras if the right conditions are met. Finally, this is the tier where I would place Jedi Revan at his peak during the Star Wars The Old Republic MMO. While the SWTOR era is notorious for its character's inconsistent strength, Revan being a prime example, it is indisputable that he got progressively more powerful as the storylines unfolded. He defeated Starforge Malak after a fierce duel, and would go on to become strong enough to threaten an early Emperor Vitiate. Revan would grow even more formidable after his release from stasis, with his spirit eventually aiding in Vitiate's complete and utter annihilation. Truly, he was a legend whose influence transcended time itself. Well guys, I hope you enjoyed this breakdown and ranking of the Knights of the Old Republic Sith. I imagine this video will incur a lot of discussion, and I'm very excited to hear what you all have to say. As always, leave any thoughts or questions in the comment section below. May the Force be with you, stay safe, and I'll see you guys later.